The first shot cracked the night open like a whip. Private First Class Mason Cole felt the vibration of it in his ribs before his ears even caught up. He ducked behind the rusted hulk of a burned-out pickup truck, his M4 tight against his chest. Gravel dug into his knees, sweat already stinging his eyes even though the desert night was cold. Another round sparked against the metal inches from his helmet. "Contact front," someone shouted, voice breaking over the radio. Mason forced himself to breathe. His squad had been walking point through the outskirts of Al-Rashid, a town where every alley smelled like burned oil and suspicion. Intel had said the sector was quiet. Mason almost laughed at the word now, though the sound lodged in his throat. Quiet had turned into gunfire fast. Staff Sergeant Ramirez, broad-shouldered and never rattled, slid in beside him. "You see that muzzle flash?" he barked. Mason nodded. "Second story, red shutters." "Good. Put rounds through it. Now." Mason peeked over the hood, finger tightening. The recoil of his rifle hammered his shoulder, controlled bursts ripping glass and splinters from the dark window. A scream rose, sharp then cut short. Mason didn't know if he'd hit flesh or just scared them, but Ramirez was already moving. "Shift left." "On me." The squad broke cover, boots pounding across dirt and broken concrete. The stench of sewage mixed with gunpowder, and the adrenaline made Mason's hands shake though the rifle felt like it weighed nothing. Bullets chased them, chewing walls, snapping wires overhead. One man stumbled, Corporal Dykes, pale as chalk but still running. "Stack on the door." Ramirez bellowed. The squad slammed against the wall of a crumbling house, one by one, hearts thudding in rhythm. Mason could hear his own pulse louder than the shooting. Ramirez's hand chopped down. The breech charge thundered, the door flying inward. Smoke. Screams. The squad poured in. Mason was third through, weapon raised, clearing his corner. A man with a rifle spun toward him, eyes wild. Mason didn't think, his training took over. 3-round center mass. The man folded, weapon clattering. The smell hit him then, blood, sweat, something acrid. Mason swallowed hard but there was no time. Another insurgent rushed from the hallway, screaming words Mason couldn't understand but the intent was clear. A knife gleamed. Mason hesitated, fear like ice. Dykes shoved him aside, firing point blank. The attacker collapsed, knife clanging harmlessly on the tile. Mason gasped, adrenaline making his whole body shudder. Dykes slapped the back of his helmet. "Eyes up, Cole. Don't freeze again." Mason nodded, ashamed but forced himself to keep moving. By the time they cleared the house, silence pressed heavy. 3 bodies lay cooling in the dust. Ramirez's radio squawked, higher command barking for sitrep. He answered calm like they'd just been out for a jog. Mason stood in the corner, chest heaving. His rifle barrel trembled. He'd killed his first man. He thought it might feel like victory but it felt like swallowing glass. "Cole." Ramirez's voice snapped him back. "Bag their weapons. Leave the bodies." Mason obeyed, trying not to look at the faces. One of the men couldn't have been older than 19. He looked like someone Mason might have gone to high school with, if Mason's high school had been on the other side of the world. As they stepped out into the night, villagers had gathered, shadows in the dim glow of oil lamps. Their eyes followed the squad, hard, resentful, afraid. Mason could almost hear the questions unspoken. "Why are you here? Why did you kill them? Are you next?" "Keep your heads on a swivel," Ramirez muttered. They moved down the street, tension thrumming like wire pulled too tight. Then Mason saw her. A young woman, pulled roughly by 2 insurgents who had been hiding in the crowd. Her hair was matted, her wrists bound. The men dragged her forward, shouting. The villagers parted like water. Ramirez raised a fist. The squad froze, rifles leveled. The insurgents shoved the girl into the open, tearing at her clothes, forcing her onto her knees under the flickering streetlight. They shouted something, waving rifles, the intent unmistakable. Humiliation, a warning, a challenge. Mason's gut churned. Ramirez whispered through clenched teeth. "They want us to hesitate." One of the insurgents yanked at the girl's sleeve, baring her shoulder. Mason's breath caught. There, etched in dark ink, was a tattoo. Not Arabic, not tribal. An eagle clutching arrows, the U.S. Army crest. Ramirez's eyes widened. He stepped forward just enough. "Jesus Christ. She's one of ours." The insurgents didn't know, or didn't care. They laughed, jeered, shoving her down. Mason felt a bolt of rage cut through his fear. He couldn't just stand there. His finger tightened on the trigger, every nerve screaming to act. "Wait for my signal," Ramirez hissed. But there was no time. One insurgent leveled his rifle at the girl's head. Mason made his decision. He broke cover, firing in a controlled burst. The first insurgent's head snapped back, body dropping. The second spun, shouting, raising his weapon. Too slow. Ramirez and Dykes opened up, shredding him before he could aim. The girl fell sideways, hands still bound, eyes wide in shock but alive. Mason sprinted forward, ignoring Ramirez's curse. Bullets cracked from rooftops, villagers scattering. Mason dropped beside her, cutting the ties with his knife. "You're safe," he panted. "You're safe." Her voice trembled, rough but clear. "Took you long enough." For a split second Mason almost laughed, disbelief mixing with relief. But then another shout went up. More insurgents, more rifles. The street erupted into chaos again. Ramirez roared, "Cole, get her out of here." Mason grabbed her arm, dragging her toward cover. She stumbled but kept pace, surprisingly steady. Bullets sparked around them. Mason dove behind a wall, pressing her down. "Who are you?" he demanded, breath ragged. Her eyes burned with defiance even in the dark. "Specialist Avery Grant. 10th Mountain. Captured 3 weeks ago." Mason's stomach twisted. "A U.S. soldier. Alive." Before he could respond, Ramirez's voice cut through the gunfire. "Cole, move. Evac point 2 blocks north." Mason hauled Avery to her feet. "Stay close." They ran. Every corner felt like a trap, every shadow a muzzle flash waiting to happen. Twice Mason nearly tripped, but adrenaline kept him upright. Avery, though thin and battered, moved like someone who'd already fought to survive. Behind them, the squad laid down fire, covering their retreat. The sounds of war, shouts, shots, screams, echoed down the alleyways. Mason's lungs burned, legs pumping until they reached the designated intersection. A Humvee roared into view, headlights cutting through dust. The rear hatch swung open. Mason shoved Avery inside, then scrambled in after her as rounds pinged off the armor. Dykes and Ramirez piled in seconds later, the driver already gunning it. The Humvee tore through the night, bouncing over potholes. Mason collapsed against the bench, chest heaving, sweat freezing on his skin. Avery sat across from him, wrists raw, eyes staring but unbroken. Ramirez studied her in the dim light. "That tattoo just saved your life, Specialist." She met his gaze without flinching. "That tattoo's the only reason I kept fighting." Mason couldn't look away from her. He had acted on instinct and it had changed everything. He didn't know what consequences were coming, but he knew this. The war had just gotten personal. The Humvee roared toward the forward operating base, but Mason's thoughts were louder than the engine. He replayed the moment, the hesitation, the decision, the trigger pull. He thought about the young man he killed in the house, about the villagers' eyes, about Avery's defiant stare. He wondered if he'd made the right call. He wondered if he'd live long enough to find out. And somewhere deep down, beneath the adrenaline, fear, and exhaustion, Mason felt the faint spark of something he hadn't dared feel since landing in this desert: purpose. The night swallowed them again, but it was no longer quiet. Nothing would ever be quiet again. The Humvee screeched through the FOB gates just before dawn. The searchlights cut off as the convoy rumbled inside, the heavy gate slamming shut behind them like the lid of a coffin. Mason Cole leaned against the metal wall of the vehicle, sweat-damp uniform clinging to his skin, mind spinning. Avery Grant sat opposite him, spine straight despite her bruises, eyes sharp and wary like a cornered wolf. As the engine died, Ramirez yanked the rear hatch open. "Everybody out." Mason jumped down, boots crunching gravel. The desert air smelled faintly of diesel and burnt coffee. Avery followed, stumbling once, but refused Mason's offered arm. She adjusted her torn blouse like pride alone could sew it back together. At the gate, 2 MPs froze when they saw her, hair matted, wrists raw, but unmistakably wearing the remnants of an army uniform under civilian rags. "Holy hell," one muttered. "She's..." "Yeah," Ramirez cut him off. "Specialist Avery Grant." "Mia." "Not anymore." The MPs gawked, but Ramirez bulldozed past them, leading the squad and Avery straight toward the command tent. Mason trailed close, stealing glances at her. Every detail, her posture, her silence, felt like a riddle begging to be solved. Inside the command tent, the air reeked of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Maps littered the table, dotted with red and blue markers. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes looked up from the chaos, his face carved from stone. "What the hell's this, Ramirez?" Ramirez didn't flinch. "Rescued POW, sir. Specialist Avery Grant, 10th Mountain. Found her in Al Rashid tonight." Hayes stood, eyes narrowing. "That's impossible." Grant was presumed Kia. Intel said her patrol was wiped out. Avery's voice cracked the room, calm but sharp. Intel was wrong. The silence was thick. Mason shifted on his feet, feeling like an intruder in a storm about to break. Hayes studied her tattoo, then her bruised face. His jaw tightened. If you're really Grant, you'll debrief. Every detail. How you were taken, where they kept you, what you saw. Avery's mouth curved in something between a smirk and a snarl. Gladly, sir. But I'd like a shower and a uniform first. Ramirez almost smiled. Almost. Hayes gave a curt nod. Get her squared away. Then she talks. Until then she doesn't leave this base. His eyes swept the squad. And none of you breathe a word outside this tent. Clear? Clear, Ramirez said. The squad echoed him. Mason felt the weight of the secret settle on his shoulders. As they filed out, Avery brushed past Mason, close enough he caught the faint smell of smoke and dust clinging to her. She didn't look at him, but her voice dropped low enough only he heard. You pulled that trigger fast back there. Mason stiffened. I couldn't let them. Don't explain. She finally looked at him, eyes hard as flint. Just remember that next time hesitation could kill me. Or you. Then she walked away with an MP escort, leaving Mason standing in the dust, heart hammering. By noon, rumors had already slithered through the FOB like sand through fingers. Mason caught snippets, female POW, ghost soldier, she's lying. Soldiers craned necks when Avery passed by in fresh fatigues, her hair damp, her bruises stark against clean skin. She carried herself like she'd never been broken, though Mason saw the stiffness in her movements. Mason sat with his squad at the mess hall, pushing eggs around his tray. Dykes smirked across the table. Well, Cole, you sure know how to make an entrance. Save the girl, play the hero. What's next, riding in on a damn white horse? Shut it, Mason muttered, though his ears burned. Another private leaned in. She looked right at you when she got off the Humvee. Don't think we didn't notice. Mason stabbed his eggs harder. Ramirez, sitting at the head of the table, slammed his coffee cup down. Enough. She's a soldier, not your damn soap opera. The table went quiet. Mason felt a rush of gratitude, but it soured quickly. Because beneath the teasing, beneath the admiration, there was a gnawing question he couldn't shake. Why had Avery been left alive when her whole patrol was slaughtered? That night, Mason lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling fan spin lazily. He thought of Avery's tattoo, the way her voice carried steel even through exhaustion. He thought of the men he'd killed, the villagers' eyes. He thought of how close he'd come to freezing in that house before Dykes shoved him. Sleep never came. At 0400, Ramirez shook him awake anyway. Cole with me. Briefing room. Mason stumbled after him, boots half-laced. Inside the briefing room, Hayes stood with Avery. She looked sharper now, uniform crisp, hair tied back. But her eyes still held shadows. Hayes gestured at a map. Specialist Grant's debrief indicates she was held here. His finger jabbed a red circle deep in insurgent territory, a warren of alleys and abandoned factories. She reports multiple hostages. American. Mason blinked. American. Avery spoke, voice steady. They moved me between safe houses. Last week, before they tried parading me, I overheard guards mention a transfer. 2 Marines. 1 civilian contractor. They're alive. For now. The room was silent. Mason felt his stomach twist. Hayes's jaw worked. If this is true, we'll plan a rescue op. But intel needs confirmation. Until then, this doesn't leave this room. His eyes cut to Mason. Cole, you're here because you pulled her out. She trusts you. Don't waste that. Mason straightened, throat dry. Yes, sir. After Hayes left, Mason lingered. Avery leaned against the table, arms crossed. You don't believe me, she said flatly. Mason shook his head. No. I do. I just don't understand why you're still alive. Her jaw tightened. Neither do I. Maybe they wanted leverage. Maybe they wanted a trophy. Maybe, she trailed off, eyes dark. Doesn't matter. What matters is we don't leave the others behind. Mason saw the fire in her then, not desperation but determination. Something fierce. Something dangerous. You realize if we go after them, Mason said quietly, we might not come back. Her lips twitched into the faintest smile. That's war, Cole. You signed up same as me. Ramirez stuck his head back in. Cole, let's move. Patrol in 30. Mason followed, but Avery's words echoed in his skull all day. That night the squad rolled out again. Al-Rashid loomed under the moon, silent but watching. Every shadow looked like a rifle barrel, every alley a trap. Mason rode in the Humvee, fingers drumming against his rifle. Dykes cracked a joke about chow hall meatloaf, and half the squad laughed too loud, nerves bleeding out his humor. Ramirez handed Mason the point position. Eyes sharp. You screw this up, we all die. Mason nodded, stepping out into the night. The town smelled of ash and fried spices. Dogs barked in the distance. His boots crunched gravel, every sound amplified. Halfway down a narrow alley, movement flickered on a rooftop. Mason froze, raising a fist. The squad halted. Then came the whistle, low, sharp. A signal. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions. Bullets ricocheted, sparks dancing. Mason dove for cover, shouting into his radio. Contact left, right rooftop. The squad returned fire, the alley exploding with muzzle flashes. Mason's heart slammed, hands steady despite the chaos. He spotted a figure on the roof, shouldered his rifle, squeezed, missed. The insurgent ducked, firing back. Mason's cheek stung where brick shards cut him. Dykes cursed, dragging a wounded private to safety. Ramirez roared orders, voice cutting through the gunfire like a blade. Then Mason saw it, another figure slipping through a doorway at the alley's end. Not firing, not panicked. Calm. Almost deliberate. Mason's gut clenched. Ramirez. Someone's moving out the back. Go. Ramirez barked. Take Cole with you. Mason sprinted, boots pounding, Dykes hot on his heels. They burst through the doorway into a dark stairwell. Dust and rot choked the air. They climbed fast, rifles raised. On the roof, moonlight revealed a single insurgent waiting. But he didn't shoot. He smiled. You're too late, he said in broken English. Then he bolted, leaping across rooftops like a shadow. Mason swore, chasing. Dykes behind him, panting. They scrambled across the roofs, each leap a gamble. Mason raised his rifle mid-run, fired, missed. The insurgent vanished into the dark. They skidded to a halt, breathing hard, the city sprawling silent below. Dykes spat. That was a setup. They wanted us chasing ghosts. Mason's chest heaved. He looked at the empty rooftops, the alley below still echoing with gunfire. And he knew Dykes was right. Back at the alley, the insurgents melted away as suddenly as they appeared. When the squad regrouped, 2 soldiers were wounded, 1 badly. Ramirez's face was stone, but his eyes burned. This wasn't random, he growled. They're probing us. Testing how we move. Mason wiped sweat and grit from his face. The image of the smiling insurgent seared into his brain. He knew deep down this wasn't over. When they returned to the FOB at dawn, Avery was waiting outside the command tent. She looked at Mason's torn sleeve, the blood streak on his cheek. They're moving the prisoners, she said quietly, like she'd expected it. Mason's stomach dropped. How do you know? Because that's what they did with me. Every time they thought rescue was close. Mason wanted to argue, to demand how she could know for sure. But he didn't. Because he realized something terrifying. She wasn't guessing. She was remembering. And if she was right, the clock had already started ticking. The sun bled orange over the FOB when the alarm klaxon jolted Mason awake. He threw himself out of his bunk, boots half-laced, rifle already in hand. The siren wasn't a drill. He felt it in the pit of his gut. Soldiers swarmed the yard, shouting, sprinting toward the motor pool. Ramirez intercepted him, jaw tight. Briefing room. Now. Mason followed, adrenaline already kicking. Inside, the command tent buzzed with tension. Colonel Hayes stood at the map table, Avery Grant at his side. Her uniform was crisp now, but her face was pale, eyes shadowed. She didn't look at Mason, though he felt her awareness of him like static. Hayes stabbed a finger at the map. Intel confirms it. Last night's ambush was a diversion. Insurgents are moving hostages. 2 Marines, 1 civilian contractor. Convoy headed south. If they reach the border, they're gone. Ramirez crossed his arms. What's the play? Hayes's gaze swept the room. We intercept. But make no mistake, this isn't a sweep and clear. It's smash and grab. In out, before their reinforcements collapse on you. You'll have minimal support. UAV overhead, quick reaction force on standby. That's it. Mason's pulse quickened. This was it, the mission Avery had warned about. Hayes turned to her. Specialist Grant, you'll accompany the squad. A murmur rippled through the officers. Ramirez frowned. Sir, with respect, that's a liability. She's been through hell. She needs rest, not. I'm not sitting this out, Avery snapped, voice sharp enough to cut steel. I know their tactics. I know how they move. You want those hostages alive, you need me. The room froze. Hayes's eyes drilled into her, then flicked to Ramirez. She goes. End of discussion. Mason's gut twisted. He wanted to argue, wanted to protect her, but something in her expression stopped him. She wasn't asking permission. She was daring anyone to stop her. Hayes leaned forward, voice grave. You've got one shot at this. If you miss that convoy, we lose them. And we'll lose face. Dismissed. 2 hours later, Mason sat in the Humvee, helmet snug, rifle across his lap. The desert stretched ahead, a flat, endless sea of sand and scrub. Avery sat beside him, silent, checking her weapon with methodical precision. Every movement was clean, practiced, like the weeks of captivity hadn't dulled her edge. You sure you're ready for this? Mason asked quietly. Her eyes flicked to him, unreadable. Ready? No. Willing? Always. He almost smiled, but the seriousness in her tone held him back. The convoy rumbled out, 4 Humvees cutting across the desert. The squad was tense, quiet, no jokes, no chatter. Everyone knew what was at stake. Ramirez's voice came through the radio. We're intercepting at grid 347. Cole, you're on point again. Don't screw it up. Mason swallowed hard. Roger. As the minutes dragged, Mason's mind replayed the firefight, the smiling insurgent. He couldn't shake the sense they were walking into another trap. Relax, Avery said suddenly, low enough only he could hear. He glanced at her. Relax? That's your advice. Her lips twitched faintly. You'll shoot straighter if your hands stop shaking. He realized she'd been watching him. He exhaled, forcing his grip to loosen. Thanks, coach. For the first time she almost laughed. Almost. The convoy ground to a halt at the intercept point, an old, cracked highway where nothing moved but the wind. The squad piled out, setting up a hasty perimeter. The UAV buzzed overhead, a distant mosquito. Ramirez crouched over the map. Convoy should be coming from that direction. He pointed down the road. Cole, Avery, your eyes. High ground, 2 o'clock. Mason and Avery jogged toward a rocky outcrop, scrambling up the slope. From the ridge, they had a clear view of the highway stretching into the distance. Heat shimmered off the asphalt. Minutes crawled. Mason's heart thudded in his throat. Then, dust on the horizon. Engines. Got him, Mason muttered, raising his scope. 3 pickup trucks, sand-caked, bristling with mounted guns. And in the middle, an armored van. That's them, Avery breathed. Mason's stomach tightened. The van meant hostages. And heavy protection. Ramirez, he whispered into the radio. Convoy in sight. 3 trucks, 1 van. Copy. We hit fast, we hit hard. The Humvees roared to life below, engines growling. Dust plumed as they tore onto the highway, blocking the convoy's path. Gunfire erupted instantly, the crack and rattle of chaos. Mason's ears rang as the world exploded below. Go! Avery shouted, already sliding down the rocks. Mason followed, boots skidding, rifle ready. They hit the highway as the firefight peaked. Bullets whined past, trucks burning, smoke thick. Mason ducked behind a concrete barrier, firing controlled bursts. One insurgent dropped, then another. Avery was beside him, firing sharp, precise shots like she'd never been gone. Ramirez's voice roared over the din. Cole. Avery. On the van. Move. They sprinted, weaving through wreckage, rounds sparking inches away. Mason reached the van first, slamming his shoulder against the door. Lock. Cover me, he barked. Avery laid down fire as Mason yanked a breaching charge from his kit, slapping it on the lock. The blast rattled his teeth. Smoke and heat surged. He kicked the door open and froze. Inside, 3 figures. 2 Marines, gaunt but alive. And 1 man in civilian clothes, bound and gagged. Their eyes went wide at the sight of uniforms. Relief and terror tangled in their faces. We got him. Mason shouted. Avery darted in, cutting restraints, dragging the first Marine to his feet. Mason hauled the contractor out, stumbling into the smoke. Bullets chewed the asphalt around them. Go, go, go. Ramirez's voice thundered. They half carried, half dragged the hostages toward the Humvees. Mason's lungs burned, every step a war. Dykes popped smoke grenades, clouds of cover blooming. They shoved the rescued into the back of a Humvee just as an RPG whooshed overhead, slamming into the road with a deafening boom. Mason hit the dirt, ears ringing, dust choking. Move! Ramirez bellowed. The Humvees gunned it, tearing back down the highway. Mason hauled himself in, Avery right behind him. The rescued huddled, trembling, eyes wide. The insurgents weren't giving up. Trucks roared after them, guns blazing. Bullets pinged off armor, sparks sprang. Mason returned fire out the hatch, every shot blind in the chaos. Avery grabbed his arm. Hold steady. She leaned out, fired a single shot. The lead truck's driver slumped, vehicle swerving off the road, flipping in a fireball. Mason gaped. She didn't. She just reloaded. The chase tore on, but the UAV's hum grew louder. Then, thunder from above. A missile streaked down, obliterating the second truck in a blossom of fire. The third peeled off, vanishing into the desert. Silence except for the Humvee's engine and the ringing in Mason's ears. They'd done it. They'd pulled them out. Back at the FOB, chaos turned to celebration. Medics rushed the rescued to triage, soldiers slapped backs, shouted in triumph. For once, victory tasted real. But Mason couldn't shake the image of the smiling insurgent from Al-Rashid. The one who said you're too late. Later, in the quiet of the barracks, Mason sat with his rifle across his knees, staring at the floor. Avery appeared in the doorway, shadowed in dim light. You should be proud, she said softly. Mason looked up. Why do I feel like we just walked into their plan? Her silence was answer enough. Finally, she stepped closer. Because you're right. They let us win tonight. And they'll make us pay for it. Mason's blood ran cold. You knew. I guessed, she corrected. Her voice trembled just for a second. They kept me alive for a reason, Cole. I don't know what it is yet. But whatever it is, it's coming. She turned, walking back into the dark, leaving Mason with nothing but the echo of her warning. And for the first time since he'd set foot in this war, Mason felt something worse than fear. He felt hunted. The first mortar hit just after midnight. The blast tore Mason from sleep, flinging him onto the floor of the barracks. Dust and debris rained down, shouts and alarms exploding around him. Another impact followed, closer, rattling the bunks. Someone screamed. The sirens wailed. Incoming. Incoming. Mason scrambled for his rifle, heart pounding, ears ringing. Ramirez's voice cut through the chaos. Gear up, move out. Perimeter defense. The squad spilled into the night. The FOB was a hell's cape. Plumes of fire, soldiers sprinting, medics dragging the wounded. Mortars thudded in, shaking the earth. Tracers streaked over the wire as insurgents pressed from the darkness. Mason dropped into a fighting position, rifle braced, firing into the shadows beyond the wall. Figures darted between blasts of light. The air reeked of smoke and cordite, the ground vibrating beneath every explosion. Dyke slid in beside him, face streaked with sweat and dirt. Guess they didn't like us stealing their toys. Shut up and shoot. Mason barked, squeezing off rounds. One shadow crumpled, another scattered. Still they came endless. Ramirez roared from the next position. Hold the line. Nobody breaks through. Mason's hands worked mechanically, magazine swaps, sight picture, trigger squeeze. His mind was a blur, fear, adrenaline, survival. Another blast rocked the wall, showering them with dirt. Then he saw her, Avery, sprinting across the yard, dragging a wounded Marine toward cover. Bullets snapped around her, tracers slicing the night. Mason's chest clenched. She moved like a ghost, fearless, but one stumble and she'd be gone. Avery, he shouted without thinking. She didn't look back. She shoved the Marine into a bunker, then grabbed a rifle from a fallen soldier, snapping off rounds toward the enemy line. Cole eyes front. Ramirez bellowed. Mason forced himself back to his sector, firing blind into the chaos. His mind screamed to watch her, but discipline anchored him. The firefight raged for what felt like hours. Mortars fell less frequently, then stopped. Gunfire tapered off. Finally, silence, broken only by moans of the wounded and the hiss of burning fuel. Mason sagged against the wall, chest heaving, ears ringing. The FOB was scarred, craters in the dirt, smoke curling from wreckage. Medics sprinted, MPs shouting orders. Avery appeared, streaked with soot, hair plastered to her forehead, rifle still in her grip. Her eyes found Mason in the dim light. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The truth was written across both their faces. This was no random attack. They were coming for her. The debrief was grim. Hayes stood at the front of the room, face gray with fatigue. Casualties, 9 Kia, 14 wounded. Perimeter held, but barely. Intel believes this was coordinated retaliation for last night's convoy interception. Mason sat with his squad, body aching, uniform stiff with dirt and blood. Avery leaned against the wall at the back, silent, arms crossed. Hayes's voice sharpened. Make no mistake, they hit us to send a message. And they won't stop here. His eyes flicked toward Avery just for a second. Mason caught it. So did Ramirez. After dismissal, the squad shuffled out, silent for once. Outside, the desert stretched endless, the night deceptively calm. Dykes muttered, "Feels like we just painted a bullseye on our backs." No one disagreed. Mason lingered. Avery was still in the briefing tent, staring at the map. He stepped closer. "You think this was about you?" Her jaw tightened. "Not think." "No." "Why?" Her eyes cut to him, sharp, tired. "Because they could have killed me a dozen times in captivity. They didn't. They let me live. Now I'm back and suddenly they're throwing everything at this base?" "You connect the dots." Mason swallowed hard. "So what do they want with you?" "I wish I knew." She looked away, voice low. "But whatever it is, it's bigger than me. Bigger than us." Before Mason could push, Ramirez appeared in the doorway. "Cole, Grant, walk with me." They stepped into the night, the air heavy with smoke. Ramirez's face was stone, but his eyes burned. "You two need to hear this before it spreads." Intel recovered fragments of comms during the attack. Call signs chatter. He paused. "They weren't just after our base. They were looking for her." Mason's stomach dropped. "You're sure?" Ramirez nodded grimly. "Word's out now, Grant's alive. That tattoo wasn't the only thing that marked her. They want her back." Avery's voice was flat. "Then we don't let them take me." Ramirez's stare drilled into them. "You both need to understand, this isn't just about surviving firefights anymore. This is chess. They're making moves, and we're pawns until we figure out the board." 2 nights later, the squad was back on patrol, sweeping the outskirts of Al-Rashid. The town was eerily quiet, shutters drawn, alleys empty. "Too quiet." Dykes whispered, "This feels wrong." Mason felt it too. Every hair on his neck bristled. He raised his hand, "Halt." The squad froze, rifles sweeping shadows. Avery crouched beside him, eyes scanning rooftops. "Ambush," she mouthed. The word barely left her lips when the street erupted. Gunfire, explosions, screams. Insurgents poured from buildings, rifles blazing. Mason dove behind a wall, firing back, heart pounding. Civilians screamed, scattering. The alley became a slaughterhouse. Ramirez roared orders, trying to push the squad into formation, but the attack was overwhelming. Mason spotted Avery across the street, pinned behind rubble. She returned fire coolly, but rounds chewed the stone inches from her head. He didn't think he moved. He sprinted across the street, sliding beside her, firing as he went. "You okay?" She gave him a look that was half gratitude, half irritation. "I was fine until you made yourself a target." Before he could answer, an explosion ripped the street open. Mason hit the ground hard, ears ringing, dust choking. When he blinked his eyes open, Avery was gone. Panic shot through him. He staggered to his feet, scanning the chaos. Then he saw her, dragged into a side alley by 2 insurgents, one with a rifle, the other with a knife. "Avery!" Mason shouted, charging after them. He crashed into the alley, rifle up. One insurgent swung his weapon. Mason fired, the man crumpled. The other slashed with the knife, catching Mason's arm. Pain flared hot, but he slammed his rifle butt into the man's face, dropping him. Avery shoved off the wall, breathing hard, wrists smeared with blood. "You always this reckless?" Mason gritted his teeth, blood dripping down his sleeve. "Only when I care." For a split second her mask slipped. Surprise, maybe something softer, but then Ramirez's shout yanked them back. "Cole. Grant. Move your asses." They sprinted back into the fray. The squad fought tooth and nail, finally forcing the insurgents to break. The survivors melted into the alleys, leaving smoke and bodies behind. The squad regrouped, battered, bloody. 1 man was down, 2 more wounded. Ramirez's face was carved in stone. "That wasn't just an ambush," he said darkly. "That was a snatch and grab. And they damn near got her." Everyone looked at Avery. She met their stares head-on, no flinch, no apology. But Mason saw the flicker in her eyes, the weight she carried. That night, Mason sat outside the barracks, arm bandaged, staring at the stars. Avery joined him quietly, lowering herself onto the step. For a while neither spoke. The desert night was deceptively calm, crickets chirping, distant gunfire faint like thunder. Finally Mason broke the silence. "They'll keep coming." Avery nodded. "Yeah. What? What's so important about you?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "They think I know something." Mason turned to her. "Do you?" Her eyes met his, fierce and haunted all at once. "I don't know. Not yet. But I will." She stood, leaving him with more questions than answers. And Mason realized the truth, the thing that chilled him more than any firefight. The insurgents weren't just fighting a war. They were hunting a secret. And Avery Grant was the key. The desert night carried no peace anymore. Mason Cole lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every time he shut his eyes he saw the alley, the insurgent's knife slicing his arm, Avery dragged into the dark. He heard Ramirez's voice barking, the gunfire, the roar of mortars slamming into the FOB. But worse than the noise was the silence that followed, and Avery's words echoing in his head. They think I know something. Something. Mason didn't know what scared him more, that she did know or that she didn't. At 0300 Ramirez shook him awake. Command wants us. Now. Mason rolled out of his bunk, groggy but alert. His squad gathered fast, boots pounding on the dirt as they moved to the command tent. Inside, Colonel Hayes looked more gaunt than ever, his uniform wrinkled, eyes ringed with fatigue. The map table was cluttered with fresh intel reports. Hayes didn't waste time. We intercepted more comms last night. Insurgents are pushing heavy in this sector. He jabbed at a red zone on the map, and they keep repeating the same name. Grant. Every eye in the room shifted to Avery. She stood near the back, arms folded, jaw clenched. Hayes's tone hardened. This isn't coincidence anymore. They want her back. And until we figure out why, every man here is at risk. The silence was heavy, the kind that pressed on skin. Mason saw suspicion flicker across faces. Even Dykes, usually unshakable, glanced at Avery like she was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Ramirez finally spoke, voice level but sharp. Sir, with respect, if she's compromised. I'm not compromised. Avery's voice cut through like a blade. Hayes's eyes narrowed. Then prove it. Tell us why they're after you. Avery's gaze swept the room, defiant but strained. I told you I don't know. They interrogated me, tried to break me. I gave them nothing. If they think I know something, that's their delusion. Mason wanted to believe her. Hell, he did believe her. But the doubt in the room was a living thing, thickening the air. Hayes's jaw tightened. Until further notice, Specialist Grant is confined to base. No patrols, no outside missions. That's an order. Avery's fists clenched, but she didn't argue. She just nodded once, sharp, and walked out without another word. The tent was quiet. Ramirez looked at Hayes. With all due respect, sir, keeping her here paints a target on this base. Better than dangling her in the open, Hayes shot back. Dismissed. Later, Mason found Avery sitting alone behind the barracks, the desert wind tugging at her hair. Her face was turned upward, toward the endless stars, but her eyes weren't really seeing them. He sat down beside her, close enough their shoulders almost brushed. You okay? She gave a humorless laugh. Soldiers keep asking me that. You want the truth? No, I'm not okay. I don't know why they want me, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and I sure as hell don't like being treated like a bomb about to go off. Mason studied her profile, the stubborn line of her jaw. Do you think Hayes is right? That keeping you here is safer? Her head turned, eyes locking on his. You've seen how far they'll go. Do you think walls will stop them? Mason didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. The next night, the base was quiet. Too quiet. Mason sat with Dykes on watch, the desert stretching dark and silent beyond the wire. Dykes chewed on a piece of jerky, gaze fixed outward. You trust her? Mason hesitated. Yeah, I do. Why? Dykes asked, voice flat. Because she's tough? Because she's one of us? Or because you saved her and now you feel like you gotta keep saving her? Mason bristled. That's not it. Then what is it? Mason didn't have an answer. Before he could try, the night shattered. A series of muffled thuds, small explosions, rippled along the east perimeter. Then gunfire. Alarm screamed. Contact. Mason and Dykes scrambled, rifles up, sprinting toward the chaos. Shadows poured through a breach in the wire, insurgents, fast and coordinated, slipping through the smoke. The firefight was brutal, close quarters, flashes of light illuminating twisted faces. Mason fired, dropped one, swung left, dropped another. His lungs burned, his shoulder throbbed with every shot. Over the radio, they're in the compound. Repeat, they've breached. Mason's blood ran cold. This wasn't a raid. It was a snatch. He tore through the chaos, searching. He knew what they wanted. And he found it. Avery, cornered near the comms shack, two insurgents closing in fast. She fought like hell, firing until her rifle clicked dry, then swinging it like a club. But they were too many. Mason charged, firing until his magazine ran empty. One insurgent dropped, the other staggered. Avery drove her boot into his knee, then smashed his head into the wall. Breathing hard, Mason grabbed her arm. Come on. They sprinted through the compound, bullets snapping, smoke stinging their eyes. Soldiers fought all around, but Mason's focus was locked on one thing: keep her alive. Finally, the insurgents broke off, retreating into the night as fast as they'd come. The base was left smoking, wounded everywhere, but the line had held. Barely. In the aftermath, Colonel Hayes's fury was volcanic. They breached our perimeter, walked into our compound, and nearly took one of our own, he barked at the assembled officers. This is unacceptable. If they want Specialist Grant this badly, we cannot keep her here. Mason's chest tightened. Sir, what are you saying? Hayes's eyes locked on Avery. I'm saying she's a liability. And liabilities get moved. She's being transferred to HQ tomorrow. Higher command will handle this. Avery's face was unreadable, but her hands were clenched fists at her sides. So you're shipping me off like cargo? Hayes didn't flinch. For everyone's safety. Including yours. Mason opened his mouth to argue, but Ramirez's hand on his shoulder stopped him. Not here. Not now. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He found Avery again, this time on the roof of the barracks, sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, staring into the desert. They're going to move me, she said before he could speak. Yeah. Mason lowered himself beside her. Do you think that's the right call? She was quiet for a long time. Finally, if I go, they'll follow. HQ, convoy, wherever. If I stay, this base keeps burning. There is no right call. Mason looked at her, really looked. The bruises, the scars, the exhaustion carved into her face. And yet, she was unbroken. He swallowed hard. Then we make one anyway. Her eyes flicked to him, sharp, questioning. What do you mean? But before he could answer, the sirens wailed again. This time not mortars, not a raid. The sound was deeper, shriller. The sound of betrayal. Ramirez's voice barked over the radio. Internal breach. Armory compromised. Repeat, inside job. Mason's blood ran cold. Inside job. Someone on their side had just opened the gates. He and Avery locked eyes, the same realization crashing into both of them. This wasn't just war anymore. It was treachery. The klaxons wailed like a living thing. Mason Cole bolted upright, rifle in hand before his brain caught up. The red emergency lights painted the barracks in blood. Soldiers stumbled into the hall, shouting, half-geared. The radio crackled with Ramirez's bark. Armory breach, repeat, armory compromised. This is an inside job. Inside job. Mason's gut twisted as he sprinted with the others. Gunfire rattled through the compound, short bursts, close range. Not the wild spray of insurgents. Controlled. Precise. They reached the armory just as the firefight flared. Shadows moved in the doorway, silhouettes of U.S. uniforms. Mason froze. Soldiers. His soldiers. One turned, face lit by muzzle flash. It was Corporal Hayes, not the colonel but his nephew, a supply clerk Mason had drunk beers with 2 nights ago. Hayes fired a burst, dropping an MP before sprinting inside with 2 others. What the hell? Dyke stammered. Ramirez didn't hesitate. Lock it down. Move. The squad stormed forward. Mason's mind reeled. Why? Why would their own turn weapons on brothers? But the only answer was the hot snap of bullets. They fought through the armory entrance, pushing room to room. The air was acrid with cordite and spilled fuel. Soldiers Mason had known for months lay dead, killed not by insurgents but by their own. Finally, they cornered Hayes and the others at the rear exit. They were loading crates of weapons into a truck, adrenaline wild in their eyes. Ramirez leveled his rifle. Drop it. Now. Hayes's face was pale, but his hands were steady. You don't understand, this isn't betrayal. This is survival. Ramirez snarled. Bullshit. You're handing our weapons to the enemy. They're not the enemy, Hayes shot back. Not compared to what's coming. You think this war's about villages and roads? You think we're the heroes here? His voice cracked. You don't know the deals being made above your pay grade. She knows. His eyes flicked to Avery. Everyone froze. Mason's stomach plunged. Avery's face was stone, but Mason saw the flicker, recognition. Fear. Ramirez's voice was ice. Last chance. Drop the guns. Hayes hesitated, then lifted his rifle. The firefight was short and savage. When it ended, the truck was riddled, the crates scattered, and Hayes lay bleeding on the ground, gasping, eyes glassy. Mason knelt, pressing a hand to his wound, but Hayes grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. His voice was wet, ragged. You'll see. She's the key. The generals, the insurgents, it's all the same war. Just different sides of the table. Then his hand fell limp. Silence. Smoke. The smell of blood. Ramirez stood over the body, face unreadable. Get this cleaned up before command spins it. But Mason couldn't move. Hayes's words rattled in his skull. She's the key. The official report painted it clean. Rogue soldiers smuggling weapons to insurgents for cash. Motive simple. Case closed. But Mason knew it wasn't simple. Not when Hayes had looked at Avery with that burning conviction. Not when she hadn't denied it. That night, he found her again. This time in the motor pool, sitting on a crate, hands black with grease like she'd been working just to keep from thinking. You knew him, Mason said quietly. She didn't look up. We all did. He said you were the key. That this isn't about insurgents. That it's bigger. Her eyes finally met his. Tired, haunted. Do you want me to deny it? Mason's mouth went dry. I want the truth. She stood, pacing, fists clenching and unclenching. Finally she stopped, shoulders rigid. In captivity they didn't just beat me. They talked. Not to me, around me. Like I wasn't even there. They thought I was broken. I heard things. Names. Deals. U.S. officers, insurgent leaders, trading intel, trading resources. Both sides keeping the war going because it makes someone money. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned. I don't know everything. But I know enough. Enough to make me dangerous to the wrong people. That's why they kept me alive. That's why our own just tried to steal weapons. That's why command wants me moved. Everyone's playing the same game. And I'm the piece they can't control. Mason's pulse thundered. He wanted to say it was impossible. That she was paranoid, traumatized. But Hayes's dying words wouldn't leave him. He whispered, so who do we trust? Her laugh was hollow. No one. The next morning, Colonel Hayes announced the transfer was moving ahead immediately. A convoy would take Avery Grant to HQ at dawn. Ramirez pulled Mason aside after the briefing. His voice was low, edged with something Mason had never heard before, doubt. Cole, you've been close to her. You believe her story? Mason hesitated. I don't know what I believe. Ramirez's eyes bored into him. Figure it out fast. Because if she's right, we're escorting a target into a kill zone. And if she's wrong, she's the reason half our brothers are dead. Mason felt the weight of the choice crush him. The convoy rolled out at first light. 2 Humvees in front, 2 in back, Avery and Ramirez in the center vehicle. Mason rode shotgun, eyes scanning the endless desert. The silence was suffocating. Every shadow in the dunes felt like a threat. Every glint of metal could be a barrel. Halfway to HQ it happened. The first IED tore the lead Humvee apart, flipping it in a fireball. The convoy screeched to a halt. Gunfire erupted from the ridges, insurgents in perfect position, hammering the trapped vehicles. Ambush. Ramirez shouted, returning fire. Mason's world narrowed to chaos. He fired out the window, rounds snapping past his head. Soldiers screamed, vehicles burned, the desert echoed with death. Then he saw it, 2 trucks barreling down the ridge, insurgents packed in, and at the front, an American. One of their own, in desert camo, waving them forward. The inside job wasn't over. Ramirez cursed. They're after her again. Mason grabbed Avery's arm. Move. They bailed from the Humvee just as an RPG slammed into it, fire blasting them onto the sand. Mason's ears rang, lungs seared. He dragged Avery behind a dune, bullets chewing the dirt around them. Ramirez's voice crackled over the radio, breaking up in static. Fall back, protect the asset. But Mason knew. This wasn't retreat. This was slaughter. He turned to Avery, chest heaving. We can't go back to HQ. We can't even trust command. We have to disappear. Her eyes widened. You're talking desertion. I'm talking survival, Mason snapped. If Hayes was right, if what you know is real, then the enemy isn't just out there. It's in here. He jabbed a finger against his chest, against the uniform they both wore. Avery stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Gunfire thundered closer. Smoke billowed from the wrecks. Mason checked his last mag, grit his teeth. All right, Avery said, voice steel. Then let's vanish. And together, they slipped into the desert, leaving behind burning Humvees, screaming radios, and a war that was no longer what it seemed. The desert swallowed them. Mason Cole and Avery Grant moved under cover of night, sand crunching beneath their boots, rifles heavy in their hands. Behind them, smoke still smeared the horizon where the convoy had burned. The radios had gone dead hours ago. Whether Ramirez was alive, Mason didn't know. Whether command believed they were captured, killed, or defected, he didn't know that either. What he did know was this: they were alone. Avery trudged beside him, face set, eyes hard. Days of firefights and ambushes had stripped her down to steel. Still, Mason saw the cracks, the shadows under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. "How long until we find shelter?" she asked, voice raw. "Sunrise," Mason said. "We'll cut east, try to hit the old oil fields. Maps show abandoned structures there." "And if they're not abandoned?" Mason managed a dry smile. "Then we'll ask politely." It was a bad joke, but she almost smiled back. Almost. They reached the oil fields by dawn. Rusted towers loomed like skeletons, pipelines twisting through the sand. The place stank of oil and dust, but it offered shade, concealment. They holed up inside a collapsed storage shack, catching their breath. Mason stripped his rifle, cleaned the grit from its chamber. Avery sat opposite him, sketching lines in the sand with a stick. Names, arrows, connections. When Mason leaned closer, he saw what she was drawing. A web. Command. Insurgents. Contractors, she muttered, tapping each circle. Hayes wasn't lying. The same names come up again and again. Deals for fuel, weapons, intel. They're not enemies. They're partners in business. And we're the product. Mason's chest tightened. So all the patrols, the firefights, the bodies. Collateral, she said bitterly. Every bullet paid for twice. He wanted to argue, to call it paranoia. But after the armory betrayal, after the ambush convoy, he couldn't. "So what now?" he asked. Her eyes lifted, fierce despite the exhaustion. "We take it public. Evidence, testimony. If I can prove what I heard, if we get it to the right people." "They'll kill us before we get there," Mason cut in. She didn't deny it. By nightfall, Mason's instincts prickled. Movement in the dunes. Shadows that weren't just shadows. "Company," he whispered. Avery gripped her rifle. "Ours?" "Not unless command started wearing sandals." They slipped out of the shack just as the first insurgents swept in, flashlights cutting the dark. Mason and Avery ducked between pipelines, hearts pounding. They crawled through the grit, every nerve screaming. Voices barked in Arabic, close now. A flashlight beam swept inches from Mason's face. He froze, lungs locked. Then a distraction, gunfire, distant, automatic. The insurgents tensed, shouting, splitting off toward the noise. Mason exhaled. That wasn't us. Avery's eyes narrowed. Then who? They found out an hour later. Ramirez. He stumbled into the oil field at midnight, arm bandaged, face streaked with blood. His rifle dangled from his shoulder, but his eyes were sharp, alive. "Thought I lost you too," he rasped. Avery rushed forward, helping him sit. Mason knelt beside him, torn between relief and suspicion. "How the hell did you make it out?" "Got separated after the ambush," Ramirez said. "Made it through the ridges. Been running since." His gaze flicked between them. "But command spinning this fast. You're already ghosts in the system. Word is you turned." Avery's jaw clenched. "Of course. Easier than admitting they're dirty." Ramirez's eyes hardened. "You need to understand. If you try to walk into HQ, you won't make it past the gate. If you try to tell the press, they'll brand you traitors before you get 2 words out." "Then what?" Mason demanded. "Roll over? Play dead." "No," Ramirez leaned forward, voice like gravel. "You vanish. Off-grid. Get the proof, then drop it where they can't bury it. Until then, everyone you see is the enemy." Mason studied him. Ramirez had been their rock, their anchor. But now he looked older. Wearier. Like a man who'd seen too much and was finally done playing the game. For the first time, Mason wondered if Ramirez had known pieces of this all along. The next 3 days were a blur of movement. They slipped through villages, trading scraps of gear for water, hiding in caves when drones passed overhead. The desert was alive with hunters. Insurgents on one side, MPs on the other. At night, Mason and Avery whispered plans in the dark. She wanted to head west, toward the coast, reach a journalist she trusted. Ramirez argued for east, into the mountains where old resistance groups still operated. Mason felt himself being pulled apart between them, 2 paths, no guarantees. But no matter the debate, one truth gnawed at him. Every step deeper into this, every choice to trust Avery, dragged him further from the soldier he had been. And yet, he didn't regret it. On the 4th night, they were ambushed. A U.S. drone, silent as death, found them near the riverbed. A missile shrieked down, vaporizing half the ridge. Mason, Avery, and Ramirez tumbled into the water, ears ringing, skin seared. Floodlights followed, helicopters, rotors pounding. "Go!" Ramirez shouted, shoving them forward. They want her alive. They don't care about me. Mason grabbed his arm. We're not leaving you. Ramirez's eyes blazed. That's an order. Before Mason could argue, Ramirez turned, firing into the lights, drawing the gunfire. Mason dragged Avery into the reeds, hauling her through the black water, every breath knives in his chest. They crawled until the noise faded, until only silence and the croak of frogs remained. When they looked back, the riverbank burned. Ramirez was gone. Mason's throat closed, rage and grief boiling together. Avery touched his arm, voice barely a whisper. He chose it. Mason nodded, but it didn't make it hurt less. They reached the coast 2 days later, filthy, starving, half-dead. Avery led him to a safe house tucked behind a fish market, where a satellite phone waited. She dialed, hands trembling. The line clicked. A voice answered, calm, professional. This is Ward. Avery's breath caught. It's Grant. I'm alive. And I have proof. Mason listened as she spilled fragments of names, places, deals. The voice on the line didn't interrupt, didn't react. Just listened. Finally. Understood. Sit tight. Extraction in 24. The line went dead. Avery sank back, eyes wet, shoulders shaking with relief. We did it. Mason wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe 24 hours would bring salvation, not another trap. But doubt gnawed his gut. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, rifle in his lap, watching the ocean. Avery slept curled in a blanket, face finally soft, younger somehow. For the first time, Mason let himself imagine a future beyond this war. A future where truth mattered, where they weren't pawns. But dawn came with helicopters. Black Hawks, low over the surf, rotors kicking sand. Soldiers poured out, weapons raised, movements too sharp, too rehearsed. Not a rescue. A recovery. Mason shook Avery awake. Her eyes widened when she saw them. They're here. Yeah, Mason said, chambering around. His voice was calm now, steady. But not for us. The door blew inward. Gunfire erupted. The world went white. When Mason woke, it was dark. His wrists were bound, his head pounding. Beside him, Avery was strapped to a chair, bruised but alive. Floodlights snapped on. Colonel Hayes stood in front of them. Not gaunt anymore. Not weary. Smiling. You should have listened, he said softly. This war feeds too many mouths to end. And you, Specialist Grant, you were never supposed to walk out of that camp alive. Avery lifted her chin, defiant despite the chains. Then you should have killed me when you had the chance. Hayes' smile widened. Oh, we will. But first, we'll take back what you think you know. Mason's blood roared. He yanked against the restraints, fury boiling, the taste of iron in his mouth. The room blurred, spinning. He caught Avery's eyes, still fierce, still unbroken. And in that moment, Mason knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The end.